Picture this. It's 2 a.m. on a quiet Minnesota night in May 2008. A 19-year-old college student makes what should be a simple phone call to his parents. I'm stuck in a ditch. Can you come pick me up? 47 minutes later, the call ends with two chilling words. Oh shit. Brandon Swanson was never seen or heard from again. This isn't some urban legend or creepypasta. This is real. The phone records exist. The 911 calls are documented. The search efforts are well documented. And after more than 16 years, no one knows what happened to Brandon that night. No body, no evidence, no answers. Just a young man who vanished into thin air while talking to his father. The perfect night that went wrong. Brandon Victor Swanson was your typical college kid. Born January 30th, 1989, he was a 19-year-old student at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby. Standing 5 feet 6 inches and weighing about 120 pounds, Brandon had naturally curly brown hair, blue eyes, and wore black wire-framed glasses. He had a small distinguishing scar above his left eye and was legally blind in that same eye. But none of these details mattered much to Brandon. He was just looking forward to celebrating. May 13th, 2008 was supposed to be a celebration. The spring semester was over, and Brandon had every reason to be happy. He'd been attending college in Canby, about 35 miles from his family home in Marshall, Minnesota. It was a route he'd driven countless times. The roads between these small Minnesota towns were familiar territory to him. That Tuesday evening, Brandon went out to celebrate with his friends. They had parties, they had drinks, they had the kind of night that college students have when they're finally free from exams and papers. By most accounts, Brandon had been drinking that night, but he wasn't stumbling drunk. Friends would later say he seemed fine to drive home. Around 10:30 p.m., Brandon called his father, Brandon Swanson, asking for a ride home. But here's where it gets interesting. Brian was apparently busy or unable to pick him up at that moment. So Brandon made the decision that would change everything. He decided to drive himself home. The drive home. The drive from Canby to Marshall should have been straightforward. Highway 68 cuts pretty much a straight line between the two towns. It's rural Minnesota, farmland as far as you can see, with the occasional grove of trees breaking up the endless fields. These aren't busy highways. Late at night, you might not see another car for miles. But somewhere along the way, something went wrong. Shortly after midnight on May 14th, 2008, Brandon Swanson drove his car into a ditch on his way home from celebrating the end of the spring semester. It wasn't a serious crash. His white 1998 Chevrolet Lumina had simply slid off the road and gotten stuck. The car wasn't damaged, and Brandon wasn't hurt. It's the kind of minor accident that happens all the time, especially on rural roads late at night. But here's where this ordinary night turned into something extraordinary. The phone call that changed everything. Just before 2 a.m., Brandon called his parents on his cell phone, telling them he had driven his Chevrolet Lumina off the road and into a ditch from which he could not remove the car. He was not hurt, and asked them to come to where he was and pick him up. Imagine getting that call as a parent. It's 2 a.m. Your teenage son calls to say he's stuck in a ditch, but he's okay. It's annoying, sure, but it's not the kind of call that keeps you up at night for the rest of your life. At least, it shouldn't be. Brian and Annette Swanson, Brandon's parents, did exactly what any parent would do. They got in their pickup truck and started driving to find their son. But there was a problem. Brandon was having trouble explaining exactly where he was. He told his parents he was near Lind, a small town southwest of Marshall. He said he could see the lights of a town in the distance. He described his surroundings as best he could, but when his parents drove to where they thought he should be, they couldn't find him. This is where the story gets really strange. For the next 47 minutes, Brandon stayed on the phone with his father. 47 minutes. Think about that. This wasn't a quick come get me call. This was almost an hour of a father and son trying to find each other in the dark Minnesota countryside. During this call, Brandon began walking. He told his father he was going to walk toward what he thought were the lights of Lind, figuring he could meet his parents somewhere along the way. His father stayed on the phone with him, driving around looking for any sign of his son. Brandon was walking through farmland, through fields, trying to make his way to where he thought he should be. His father could hear him walking, could hear the sounds of him moving through the landscape. They were both getting frustrated. Brandon couldn't understand why his parents couldn't find him. His parents couldn't understand why they couldn't find Brandon. The final words. As the minutes ticked by, you can imagine the frustration building on both sides of that phone call. Brandon is walking through dark fields, trying to get to safety. His father is driving around rural Minnesota at 2:30 in the morning, desperately trying to locate his son. Then suddenly, after 47 minutes of conversation, Brandon's final words to his parents on the phone were a chilling "Oast." The line went dead. Brandon Swanson immediately tried calling back. The phone rang, but there was no answer. He kept trying, still no answer. By the morning, the calls were going directly to voicemail. Think about those final words for a moment. Oh shit. What could make a 19-year-old suddenly exclaim that and then vanish? Did he see something? Did something happen to him? Did he fall into something? The two words that have haunted Brandon's family and investigators for over 16 years. The search begins. When Brandon didn't come home and didn't answer his phone, his parents knew something was terribly wrong. Early the next morning, they contacted the Lyon County Sheriff's Office to report their son missing. The search effort that followed was massive. We're talking about hundreds of volunteers, search dogs, helicopters, and ground teams combing through thousands of acres of farmland. The Minnesota State Patrol joined the search. The FBI eventually got involved. Volunteers involved in the search effort for Brandon Swanson gathered a month after his May 14th, 2008 disappearance, roughly 20 miles outside of Marshall, Minnesota. But here's the thing that makes this case so incredibly frustrating and mysterious. They found Brandon's car. It was discovered the next day, stuck in a ditch along a gravel road. But it wasn't where Brandon had said he was. The car was found northwest of Marshall, near the small town of Taunton, not southwest near Lind, where Brandon had insisted he was located. This discovery raised even more questions. How could Brandon have been so wrong about his location? The car was found miles away from where he said he was. Had he been confused, disoriented, or was something else going on? The investigation deepens. The more investigators looked into Brandon's disappearance, the more puzzling it became. At the time of his disappearance, he was known to be wearing a white t-shirt under a blue striped polo sweatshirt, baggy blue jeans, a black hooded zip-up jacket with an emblem on the back, and a white, flat-brimmed hat. He had his cell phone, his wallet, and the clothes on his back. No other personal belongings were missing from his car. The car itself told a story, but not the whole story. He said he had high centered the car. The car wasn't damaged and he wasn't hurt, but he needed to be picked up. The vehicle was indeed stuck in a ditch, just as Brandon had described. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no indication that anything violent had happened at the car. But if Brandon had walked away from the car, where had he gone? And why was he so confused about his location during that final phone call? Theories and speculation. Over the years, countless theories have emerged about what happened to Brandon Swanson. Some are more plausible than others, but all of them attempt to explain the unexplainable. The disorientation theory. Some investigators believe Brandon was more intoxicated than anyone realized, and he became disoriented in the dark. This would explain why he was so wrong about his location. Maybe he wandered off into the wilderness and succumbed to exposure or fell into a body of water. Minnesota has plenty of rivers, creeks, and agricultural drainage ditches that could be dangerous for someone walking in the dark. The accident theory. Perhaps Brandon fell into a river or creek and was swept away. The area has several waterways, including the Yellow Medicine River. In the dark, it would be easy to accidentally walk into water, especially if you're not familiar with the exact terrain. The "oh shit" could have been his realization that he was falling or in immediate danger. The foul play theory. This is the theory that keeps many people up at night. What if Brandon encountered someone with bad intentions during his walk? Rural areas aren't immune to crime, and a young man walking alone at 2:30 a.m. could be vulnerable. The sudden "oh shit," followed by the abrupt end to the call, could indicate he saw someone or something that frightened him. The wildlife theory. Minnesota has bears, wolves, and other potentially dangerous wildlife. Could Brandon have encountered an aggressive animal? It's less likely than the other theories, but it's not impossible. The voluntary disappearance theory. Some have suggested that Brandon chose to disappear, that he staged his own vanishing. But this theory has significant problems. Brandon had no apparent reason to disappear, no major problems in his life, and no history of wanting to start over somewhere else. The family's pain. What makes this case particularly heartbreaking is the impact it's had on Brandon's family. His parents, Brian and Annette Swanson, have never stopped looking for their son. They've worked tirelessly to keep his case in the public eye, to push for continued investigation, and to never give up hope that they might find answers. In 2010, the Minnesota legislature passed Brandon's Law, which requires law enforcement agencies to begin investigating missing person cases immediately, rather than waiting 24 or 48 hours. The law was inspired by the initial delays in Brandon's case and has since helped other families get faster responses when their loved ones go missing. Brandon's disappearance is listed on the FBI's most wanted list. This isn't because he's suspected of a crime, but because he's considered a missing person in need of assistance. The FBI's involvement shows just how seriously authorities take this case, the ongoing mystery. Here's what makes Brandon Swanson's disappearance so uniquely terrifying. It's completely inexplicable. This isn't a case where we can point to obvious red flags or clear motives. This is a case where a normal college student, doing normal college student things, simply vanished without a trace. The phone records prove Brandon was exactly where investigators think he was when he disappeared. The timeline is clear. The last known location is established. But despite all of this concrete information, despite massive search efforts, despite years of investigation, there are no answers. Nearly 15 years later, Brandon's family and authorities continue to search for answers. The case remains active. Tips still come in. Searches still happen. But Brandon Swanson remains missing. What really happened? This is the question that haunts everyone who learns about this case. What really happened to Brandon Swanson during those final moments of that phone call? Did he simply have a tragic accident in the dark? Did he fall into water and drown? Did he encounter someone with violent intentions? Did he become lost and die of exposure in the Minnesota wilderness? Or is there some other explanation that we haven't even considered? The truth is, we may never know. And that's what makes this case so particularly unsettling. We live in a world where we expect answers. We expect closure. We expect that when someone disappears, eventually we'll find out what happened to them. But sometimes people just vanish. Sometimes, despite all our technology, all our investigative techniques, all our determination, we simply cannot solve the puzzle. Brandon Swanson is one of those puzzles. The digital footprint. What makes this case even more compelling in our digital age is how well documented everything is. This isn't some mystery from decades ago, where we have to rely on faded memories and missing records. Brandon Swanson was last seen in the early hours of May 14th, 2008, leaving a friend's house in Canby, Minnesota. We have exact times, phone records, and a clear timeline. The cell phone tower data shows Brandon's phone was in the area where his car was found. The 47-minute phone call with his father is documented. The exact time the call ended is known. Law enforcement has access to all of this information, and yet they still cannot solve this case. In many ways, this makes Brandon's disappearance even more mysterious. How can someone vanish so completely in the modern world, especially when we know exactly when and approximately where it happened? The ripple effects. Brandon's disappearance has had effects far beyond his immediate family. The case has been featured on numerous true crime podcasts, television shows, and websites. It's become one of those cases that true crime enthusiasts know by heart, not because it's been solved, but precisely because it hasn't been. The case has also highlighted the unique challenges of rural disappearances. When someone goes missing in a city, there are cameras, witnesses, digital footprints. But when someone disappears in rural Minnesota, they can vanish into thousands of acres of farmland, forests, and waterways where a person could remain hidden forever. Still searching, Forum News Service checked with law enforcement on Monday and was informed there remain no new updates in the case. As recently as 2023, there were still no new developments in Brandon's case, but that doesn't mean the search has stopped. Brandon's family continues to hold out hope. They continue to work with law enforcement. They continue to ask the public for any information that might help solve this mystery. And maybe someday, someone will have that piece of information that finally explains what happened to Brandon Swanson. Maybe someday, that 47-minute phone call will make sense. Maybe someday, those final words, "Oh shit," will finally have context. The questions that remain. As we conclude this deep dive into one of Minnesota's most perplexing missing person cases, we're left with more questions than answers. Why was Brandon so confused about his location during the phone call? How could an experienced driver who knew these roads well be so wrong about where he was? What caused him to suddenly exclaim, "Oh shit," after 47 minutes of normal conversation with his father? How can someone disappear so completely that despite massive search efforts, no trace of them is ever found? Was this a tragic accident, or was something more sinister at play? And perhaps most importantly, where is Brandon Swanson? A final thought. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson reminds us that mystery still exists in our modern world. Despite all our technology, despite all our investigative capabilities, despite all our certainties about how the world works, sometimes things happen that we simply cannot explain. Brandon was a real person with real dreams, real relationships, and a real future ahead of him. He was someone's son, someone's friend, someone who mattered. His disappearance isn't just a puzzle to be solved, it's a tragedy that has affected countless people. If you have any information about the disappearance of Brandon Swanson, please contact the Lyon County Sheriff's Office or the FBI. Even the smallest detail might be the key to finally solving this mystery. Until then, Brandon Swanson remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in modern American history. A young man who vanished during a phone call with his father, leaving behind only questions, theories, and two haunting words. Oh shit. The search for Brandon Swanson continues. The hope for answers remains. And somewhere out there, the truth about what happened on that dark Minnesota night in May 2008 is still waiting to be discovered. But for now, Brandon Swanson remains missing, and his case remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries of our time.